Hey everyone, I'm Jay, and today we're going to go over our Lab 2.4. That is, we're looking at uh, kind of Module 2, and it's the fourth lab. We're going to be creating some variables this time, uh, and then we're going to output those variables. So, what are variables? Why do we need them? If we want to basically do anything useful, we need to be able to store values somehow. And that's all that variables are. We create our own name. That name is basically a location in memory, and then we can store a value in there. Now, Python is a strongly typed language, which means variables have a type. Okay, so they could be integers, it could be floating point numbers, it could be strings of characters, it could be more complex types than that. So they have a variable type, and uh, if you want to mix and match those types or change those types, there are some strict rules that you have to follow in order to do so. In contrast, a loosely typed language is one where basically all the variables are just kind of a generic type, and you can very quickly and easily change between types. You could store an integer in something, and then you could change your mind and put a string of characters in there afterwards. Um, you do occasionally run into trouble with a loosely typed language if you forget what type of variable is and you're trying to do some operation. Um, so, not everybody likes that. However, in a strongly typed language, uh, simply putting the wrong value into something will throw an error instead of trying to perform the wrong mathematical operation. So, in my mind, six in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Some languages are strong, some languages are loose, but they're, you know, kind of the same benefits in either one. So we're going to practice creating some variables, saving some values in them, and then outputting those values. So I have my file started. I have my beginning comment here, which you can't see. Let me share that with you. There you go. I have my beginning file. I have my comment, and then I have a couple of comments here that are prepping me to do the work. Okay, so the things that we're supposed to do in this assignment are create some variables, and then print those variables, and make sure we're leaving some comments to describe what we're doing, and save our file name something appropriate, right? So I'm going to start with the comments to describe myself, the steps that I'm going to do. So I have my first comment area, which is step one, and then I'm describing, I'm going to create my variables or declare what they are, and then I'm going to output my variables. What I'm not going to do is create one variable and output that variable, create another variable and output that variable, create another variable and output that variable. That is really messy. And if I were to do that on an actual project that was, going to be used, and then 6 months from now, future me has to make an edit to this thing, and future me goes, ugh, I could barely have to start from scratch and try to understand what's going on here because it's so difficult to read. Everything is messy. It's almost like spaghetti code. Okay, spaghetti code is a nickname we give to code that has, just things all around in multi-ins, multi-outs, maybe, I don't know, kind of all over like spaghetti noodles, right? So what I'm going to do instead, I'm not going to make ugly, difficult to read code. I'm going to do all my variable declarations in one area, and I'm going to space it out by at least one space and do all my outputs here. If I had a lot of other stuff to do, I would organize it accordingly. If I had other stuff to do as well, maybe if I classic program, I'd have some kind of input, some kind of process, and some kind of output. I would separate it. That would be my first step. I would be input, I write a comment and leave a space, and then I write another comment and do processing, and then below that I will write another comment and do output, and I will start filling them in. I'm a very iterative developer, so that's how I would start. And that's how I've started right here. I'm going to declare my variables, and I'm going to output those values later on. So looking back at our assignment here, these are the variables that we're going to declare, and we're going to use exactly the values and exactly the name of the variable that's listed here. Right? This is our document that tells us what to do. We're going to do exactly those variable names, and the reason we're not going to change them at all is, let's say we're working on a larger project, we have a team of people, and we get the instructions here, and it says, all right, create this variable, give it this value. If you make a change to any of that, when the other person in your team is writing their code, they don't know what you changed it to. Nothing's going to work now, and it's going to be your fault because you didn't specifically follow the instructions. And so I'm going to make this exactly what it says here, okay? And then I'm going to put it into my code. So let's have a look at that. Switch back to the screen here. Okay, so the first one was I'm going to make an integer with a value of 0, and I'm going to name it var underscore int. Hopefully you can see that. I know there's a squiggly line on my editor right now, but when you're actually looking at it, you'll see the real line without the squiggly line. So the name comes first. When I'm programming, I'm going to create the variable name, and then I'm going to assign a value to it. Okay, I'm going to do this in one line. It's not actually two actions. It is one action. So var int, okay, that's the variable name. And as you follow along with me, you'll notice that I'm very nomenclature-like when I name things. For example, when we get down to the name variable, I'm naming it name underscore full. Not full name, name full. And the reason for that is if I have a whole bunch of name variables, if I named them full name, first name, and last name, okay, and then I organized my stuff later on in alphabetical order, it'd be all over the place. But if I name them name full, name first, name last, then I organize them alphabetically, they will all fit together. Right? So I'm going to do that with variable names. I'm going to do that with dates. I'm going to go year, month, day, so that dates, when organized alphabetically, they're also chronological. Okay, so you're going to see me do that here. I have var int, very basic variable name, but when I get to the name one, you'll see that. Okay, so this one is equal to 0. That's it. Okay. In Python, we don't use semicolons at the end, and for our purposes right now, I'm also not indenting anything because everything is just top level. I don't have anything to indent at this point in time. Okay, so that's just the first one. It is an integer of 0. Now, if I were to do 0.0, it's no longer an integer. Okay, it's a floating point decimal. Okay? So definitely want it to be the proper integer. Next variable is my score equals 100. Hopefully that's true for all of you. Technically speaking, this assignment's not worth 100 points, but you hopefully will get 100% of the points it is worth. Next one is var float. This one is a floating point decimal value, and it's going to be called 10.10. That's the value of it. Okay, now that I've given it a decimal value, it is a floating point value. And then this, the next one, this is the one that I was talking about where I'm going to name it with some sort of nomenclature. Right? And my full name, J. Mihawk, I'm putting it in single quotes. You could use single quotes or double quotes. I do a lot of web programming, and so I tend to use single quotes all the time because on rare occasions I need to put double quotes inside of my single quotes. And you'll see as we progress that single quotes and double quotes are quite special. You can't mix between the two of them, and there's a lot of special cases around that, but we'll get there. And then the last string is going to be called JJC, and its value is going to be capital JJC. Okay, clear up some space right there. Then next I'm going to output these variables because I have them all created, and I'm going to output them with a simple print command. Int. Okay. You don't have to put the space there. I just do because it's more readable. Okay. And then I'm going to copy and paste a bunch of times. And the reason for that is to avoid typos. And because I'm doing the same thing 5 times, I'm going to just copy and paste it 5 times. But as long as I don't have a typo the first time, I won't have a typo any longer. I'm going to have one blank line at the end. Save and run my code. Okay, and then you'll see what comes out at the end is each one. Notice the 10.10, they did truncate that trailing 0. Okay, we could write some special code to output with the exact precision that we want, but we're not quite there yet for this lab, so let's not worry about that. I do have a little test right here where I have all the exact same things, but then I outputted not only the value of the variable, but what type the variable is. Okay, and then so everything in here is exactly the same except for this addition at the bottom. And then you'll notice that I have the type, and then I have a comma and a space, followed by the variable itself. And this is, in my opinion, the quickest and easiest way to print multiple things on the same line. So one option is I could do a plus, which would concatenate things. Concatenate is when you put 2 strings together. The problem is this type is going to give me a string, it's going to print, and then when I try to concatenate an integer, a string and an integer can't be concatenated, so that would cause an error, it would break my code. I could specifically say I want to output as if this is a string, but that's added code, additional overhead that will actually, if we were doing this hundreds and thousands of times as our code was running, it would slow things down a little bit. So instead, I'm going to use the comma, and I could do a comma and I could add, I could just continue. I don't know that there's a limit to how many things I could put in one single print command, but if you separate it by a comma, that's the easiest way to do it. Okay, so I'll run this and we'll have a look at what it does. And for confirmation, we've outputted all our variables, and then I've outputted what type the variable is. Now this is above and beyond what this lab is meant to do. However, I do want you to see that simply storing the value of 0 in this integer variable, I didn't tell it was going to be an integer, I just gave it a value that is an integer, and it saved it as the correct type. Same thing for the float, right? So if I wanted to make this 0 a float, I will put 0.0, and then when I rerun it, now it is a float, 0.0, okay? So this added part right here is just confirmation that these are the right variable types, simply by giving them the correct values. Python knows, oh, if I have a string of characters with single or double quotes around them, it's a string, str. Right? It knows what it is. If I have a number value with a decimal point, it knows that's going to be a float. If I have a number value with no decimal point, it knows that's an integer, and it's going to type it accordingly. Right? You can do math with integers and floats. If you do math with an integer and a float, the result is going to be a float. Right? It's going to be the largest of them. Right? So that's just a little note for the future. But this is added. Right? Actually, our assignment is just to do this much. Okay? And remember, don't just do one thing at a time. That's very ugly code, and it's difficult for future you to come back and look at it. And so when I'm grading these, I'm going to be grading them as if I am future you, and if your code does that, you'll get a little bit less points for writing difficult to read code. Okay, so that's lab 2.4, and I know that your score is going to be 100 if you've watched this video. See you next time.